Marine Le Pen, the far-right candidate, is leading the polls with just a couple of days to go before the first round of voting to decide who will be the next president of the French Republic. This presidential election has been conducted in a climate of growing ethnic tension, a rise in nationalism, and escalation in instances of Islamic terrorism and economic stagnation. There is also a growing public resentment and mistrust of the current political leadership for its corruption and incompetence. These factors have all given Marine Le Pen and the National Front an advantage and has led to a rise in her popularity. The presidential election has been marked by controversy because of Marine Le Pen's outspoken views and ties to the far right. Her most recent provocative statement has caused outrage in the Jewish community and in the international press. She gave a television interview on a French news channel where she denied that the French government were responsible for the historic Vel d'Hiv, when in the Second World War the French police, without the help of the Nazis, rounded up tens of thousands of Jewish men, women and children in detention centres before sending them to the death camps.
France is not responsible for the Vel d'Hiv roundup. I think, in a general way, if anyone was responsible, it was those who were in charge at the time, not France.
She went on to say, France had taught our children that they have all the reasons to criticise the country and only to see perhaps the darkest aspect of our history. So I want them to be proud of being French again. Marine Le Pen's comments have been attacked by a main left-wing rival, Emmanuel Macron, who said her comments were a serious mistake. Some people had forgotten that Marine Le Pen is the daughter of Jean-Marie Le Pen. We must not be complacent or minimise what the National Front is today. What is extremely disturbing about Marine Le Pen's comments is there's an underlying tone of anti-Semitism that is running through her campaign and is held by many of her supporters, despite her best efforts to break away from the extreme views of her father, the founder of the National Front. Her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, has been repeatedly convicted for his anti-Semitic comments, such as calling the Holocaust a detail of history. Marine Le Pen's comments have sparked an angry reaction from the French Jewish community and by the Israeli government. The leading Jewish organisation in France, CRIF, issued a statement denouncing her revisionist views, saying that they unveil the true face of the National Front. Her words indicate she's part of the Vichy tradition and she shares the collaborationist opinions of her father and the founders of the National Front. CRIF stated that her declarations are an insult to France, who in 1995 publicly acknowledged its responsibility in the deportation of French Jews to the Nazi death camps. Marine Le Pen's offensive comments have once again sparked a debate regarding the role played by the French government in collaborating with the Nazis and its role it played in the final solution. In June 1940, the French government and army surrendered to the Nazis and was replaced by the Vichy government. The Vichy government was a proxy French government that was controlled by the Nazis to administer their policies in France. First World War French hero Philippe Pétain, who actively collaborated with the Nazi regime, was placed in charge. The Vichy government actively collaborated with the Nazis as it facilitated the deportation of Jews across France. Then on the 20th of January 1942, at the Wannsee Conference in Berlin, high-ranking Nazi officials discussed what should be done with European Jewry and came up with a final solution: the destruction of the Jewish people. The Wannsee Conference sealed the fate of French Jewry, paving the way for the Nazis to prepare for the mass transfer of French and European Jews to the gas chambers of Poland. Historically, Vel d'Hiv roundup was the largest deportation of Jews during the Holocaust, and it took place in Paris between July the 16th and 17th, 1942. The French police force carried out the mass arrest of 13,000 Jews, men, women and children. The first transfer of French Jews occurred on the 27th of March 1942, when more than 1,000 Jews were transported from Champigny to Auschwitz. This was followed by a Nazi decree on the 29th of May the same year that all Jews in France were forced to wear the yellow Star of David. In the summer of 1942, the mass roundup of French Jews began by the Vichy government and the French police without the help of Nazi forces. In the early hours of the 16th of July, the French police rounded up thousands of men, women and children throughout Paris, and by the end of that day, over 2,000 Jewish men, 5,000 women and over 3,000 children had been detained. It is believed that approximately 6,000 Jews were rounded up and transported to Darcy in the northern suburb of Paris. The rest of the detainees were held in the indoor velodrome known as the Vel de Hive. The conditions inside the velodrome were unbearable, as some 7,000 Jews, including 4,000 children, were crowded inside the sports arena. There was hardly enough space to lie down, with no food, water or sanitation provided. To make matters worse, the indoor stadium had a glass ceiling and ventilation had been closed to stop people escaping, and this contributed to the suffocating atmosphere. These Jewish people were detained in the velodrome for 5 whole days in inhumane conditions. Then they were transported to other detention camps in northern France, but before being loaded onto cattle trains and sent to concentration camps in Poland. The Nazis deliberately separated the children from their parents, detaining them for another few weeks before eventually also transporting them to the camps. This was intentional to maximize the suffering and distress of the adults. By the time of the liberation of France by the Allied forces in August 1944, approximately 77,000 French Jews had been murdered in the Nazi concentration camps, and most of them had died in Auschwitz. Shockingly, it took 53 years for the French government to acknowledge their part in the final solution at Vel de Hive on the 16th of July 1942. It was in 1995 that the French President Jacques Chirac said, "France, land of entitlement and human rights, land of hospitality and asylum." France on that day committed an irreparable act. It failed to keep its word and delivered those under its protection to their executioners. This horrific episode represents one of the darkest chapters in French history and has not been forgotten by French Jewry, who had relatives, family and friends murdered at the hands of the Nazis with help of the Vichy government and the French police. It is a tragedy that it took over 50 years for successive French governments to finally admit their guilt in this criminal act of betrayal to their own Jewish community. This demonstrates why Marine Le Pen's comments claiming that the French government was not responsible for the Vel de Hive roundup is so shameful and hurtful to the Jewish community in France and all over the world. Marine Le Pen's shocking anti-Semitic comments follow on for some deeply disturbing remarks that she made in this presidential election campaign. Back in February of this year, she made a campaign pledge that if she was elected as the next president of France, she would ban dual citizenship in non-EU countries. For many French Jews who are also Israeli citizens, they would be forced to give up their Israeli passports or live as foreign residents in France without voting rights. She also reiterated her support to ban the wearing of Jewish skullcaps in public places as part of an overall ban on religious and mostly Muslim attire. Her party, the National Front, has pledged that if elected, as an extension of their clampdown on the Muslim community, they would also ban halal and kosher slaughter of animals. Marine Le Pen states that these policies are part of her strategy to clamp down on the Islamization of the country, but as a direct consequence, French Jews will find themselves unable to practice Judaism in France. This will make French Jewry feel even more marginalized in French politics and extremely fearful about the prospect of a Le Pen victory on the 7th of May. Marine Le Pen, in making the shocking comments about Vel de Hive, knows well that she will cause hurt and pain to the French Jewish community, but she is appealing to the nationalistic French voters and to neo-Nazi supporters in her own party who hold the same anti-Semitic views of her father. The French Republic is being rocked by an unprecedented wave of ISIS-inspired Islamic terror attacks, combined with a dangerous rise of anti-Semitism that has already led many French Jews to make Aliyah to Israel in record numbers. If Marine Le Pen beats her main rival, Emmanuel Macron, on May the 7th this year, it will cause a political earthquake across Europe and usher in a new dangerous era for France and Europe. We are already witnessing a rise in anti-Semitism in France that we've not seen since the Nazi occupation over 70 years ago. And now the prospect of Marine Le Pen residing in the Élysée Palace is frightening for most French Jews. There is no doubt that many of Marine Le Pen's advisors and supporters hold extremely troubling anti-Semitic views that does not bode well for the future of France. We're now living in dangerous times in Europe as we're witnessing the emergence of the hunters, as described in the Bible in Jeremiah chapter 16, verses 16 to 18. Behold, I will send for many fishermen, says the Lord, and they shall fish them. And afterwards I will send for many hunters, and they shall hunt them from every mountain and every hill, and out of the holes of the rocks. This period of peace and prosperity across Europe that was marked by the era of the fishermen who worked tirelessly to help bring many European Jews back to the ancient covenant homeland Israel is now over. Now we're seeing the rise of Jew hatred again on the continent of Europe, and this is the driving force behind the hunters. As a direct result of these ISIS-inspired terror attacks across Europe, we are witnessing the return of the far-right neo-Nazi parties, and the hunters could be described as a combination of Islamic extremists and neo-Nazis, as the spirit that's driving these dark political forces is the spirit of anti-Semitism. It is important for us Christians that we do not become deceived, but become watchmen on the walls of Jerusalem, and to know the time and the seasons so that we can pray and make a righteous stand against the rise of evil.